Hey everyone, my name is Tim, and this is So You Want Me to Believe. First of all, thank you so much to everyone who has already listened to the show. I'm trying really hard to push it out to as many people as I possibly can, honestly probably to the extent of being annoying. So thanks to everyone who knows me personally for putting up with the constant updates. I haven't gotten a lot of feedback as of yet about my first episode, but it looks like people from all over the country are listening, and I even had a couple international listeners, which I think is pretty cool. Also, thanks for bearing with me while I work out the kinks of how this whole thing works. It's all new to me, and while I'm really proud of what I produced for you guys in that first episode, I am aware that it was a little choppy, and I was talking way too fast and a little robotic. But rest assured, I am working on it. It can only get better with time, right? With that being said, I would like some honest feedback about the show. What do you think of the music? I feel like the first episode was a little too short, but what length would you prefer for an episode? Do you think I was descriptive enough to get a good picture, or did you even find that the content held your interest? I'm honestly curious to know what people prefer. I know what I like in a podcast, and I've tried to include those elements here, but this show isn't just for me. I mean, I am doing it purely for the fun of creating a show, but I also want to put something out that people genuinely want to listen to. So let me know what you think, whether that be in the form of a review, or if you want to send me an email at sywmtbpod@gmail.com. So once again, before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things I've been working on to help support the show. And let me tell you why. If you're listening to this, you're probably familiar with how podcasts work, and these little plugs are a necessary part of the medium. A lot of podcasts like to start with business before they get into their story, and a lot of podcasts like to cut into the story to advertise to you. At this point, I don't feel that I want to interrupt the story to bore you with ads, so I want to get them out of the way before I do anything else. Plus, I only have a couple of things to plug right now anyway, so I hope that sounds like a fair deal. Anyway, the first thing I want to tell you about is my Patreon page. If you don't already know, Patreon is an online membership platform that provides business tools for creators to run a subscription content service. It allows subscribers or patrons to help creators to continue producing content while offering exclusive rewards and perks for their support. The link to my Patreon page is www.patreon.com/sywmtbpod. I discussed the tiers and incentives in my first episode if you'd like to hear me verbalize them, but I don't want everyone to have to sit through that again, so I'm not going to repeat them now. But if you'd like to familiarize yourself with the tiers and incentives, please check them out by going to the Patreon page. Again, that link is www.patreon.com/sywmtbpod. I'll also have that link posted in the show notes. If you do like the show, please consider subscribing to the Patreon. Everyone who subscribes not only gets exclusive content, but it goes a long way in helping me produce the show. Any support is greatly appreciated. I also want to plug Buzzsprout. I don't have enough of a listener base to get an actual sponsor, so to be clear, Buzzsprout is not sponsoring this show. But they are a great service that offers content creators affiliate partnerships, so I do want you to know about them. Buzzsprout is a podcast hosting service that allows creators to put the content they make out into the world. If you've ever been interested in starting your own podcast like I'm doing now, Buzzsprout is an excellent resource to help you achieve that goal. Following the link in the show notes lets Buzzsprout know I sent you, get you a $20 Amazon gift card if you sign up for a paid plan, and help support the show. I use Buzzsprout, and it's really helped make putting out my podcast an easy task. Buzzsprout offers a lot of useful and convenient features, like tons of guides to help you find the right equipment at the right price, getting your show listed in every major podcast platform, and by providing a great-looking podcast website that includes audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and more. And as a side note, I set up my website today. That's sywmtbpod.buzzsprout.com, and it is truly a nice professional looking website. Everything has been really easy going through Buzzsprout, and I honestly don't think I could have figured everything out without their help. So while this technically is an affiliate ad, I really am impressed by Buzzsprout, and I'm really appreciative of all the support and ease of use they provide for creators. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners. The team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. So join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. Okay, I'm done boring you with the business end of everything, so let's talk about this week's topic. This week's episode is a mixture of a couple of stories, but I promise they're connected. Some of this is a real stretch to believe, but when I first learned about it, I was so fascinated that I couldn't stop reading. I'm going to start by telling you about that part of the story, which is probably nothing more than a creepypasta circulated online. Although there are several people who have claimed to have experienced it themselves, so it could be more than just a story. Then I'm going to tell you about a real-life case that some people theorize involves that creepy story. These two topics are the elevator game and the death of Elisa Lam. If you haven't heard of the elevator game, it's one of those really wild challenges that people might try because they sound creepy, but are sure they won't work. Similar to like Charlie Charlie or Bloody Mary, but this one has a lot of steps to it, and if it's real, the results could be terrifying and deadly. I've never attempted this, although I won't say it wouldn't be fun to try, but I'd say probably don't try it because the descriptions in both of these stories are pretty horrifying, but do what you're gonna do. So, the elevator game is supposedly a ritual that originated in South Korea that transports you to another world. This other world is exactly like our own, except that you are that world's only inhabitant. It's a step-by-step process, and they say that you must perform the steps exactly as described, or it either will not work, or the consequences could be dire. The instructions to this game are found easily on the web, and I think the best way to really describe the game is to read the steps to you word by word. According to the instructions I was able to find, the only thing you need to play this game are at least one person, which would be the best way to ensure something happens, but the game can be played with more people, a public building with at least 10 floors, and obviously an elevator. To start the game, the player or players need to enter the elevator and follow these steps without exiting. Press the button to go to the 4th floor. Go to the 2nd floor. Press the 6th floor. Go back to the 2nd floor. Go to the 10th floor, and then go to the 5th floor. If at any point during this process, if someone enters the elevator or one of the players leaves the elevator, do not proceed with the game as it will not work. If those things occur, you must start from the beginning. Once on the 5th floor, it's possible that a woman may enter the elevator. If a woman does enter the elevator, do not look at her, do not speak to her, and remain absolutely silent. That woman is not human, and if you interact with her in any way, she will decide to keep you for her own. I'm not really sure what they mean by she will keep you for her own, but it doesn't sound great, so probably just don't talk to her. Go to the 1st floor. Again, do not proceed if someone enters the elevator or if one of the players leaves the elevator. If someone does, start from the beginning. At this point, the elevator will either ascend or descend. If the elevator descends and reaches the 1st floor, leave and do not look back. However, if the elevator ascends to the 10th floor, you'll want to exit the elevator. The woman may ask, "Where are you going?" or "What's wrong?" Her voice will be high when she asks those questions, kind of like a child, but just ignore her. Absolutely do not respond. Once you exit, you will be in the other world. If you are in fact in the other world, you will be completely alone and no electronics will be working. The other world is identical to our world, but the two differences you will see here are all the lights will be off, and the only thing you'll be able to see from the windows is a red cross in the distance. Explore at your leisure, but be careful. This world is incredibly disorienting and could prove impossible to return from. If you reach the other world, you'll need to follow these steps to return to our world. You must use the same elevator and press the elevator buttons in the following order: 4, 2, 6, 2, 10, 5. When you reach the 5th floor, press the button for the 1st floor. The elevator will again begin to ascend to the 10th floor. Press any other floor's button to cancel the ascension. You must press the button you used to cancel the ascension before you reach the 10th floor. This should cause the elevator to descend to the 1st floor no matter which button you press. After you reach the 1st floor, check your surroundings carefully. If anything seems off, even the smallest detail, do not exit the elevator. If you detect something wrong, repeat step 2 until your surroundings look as they should. Once you are confident you have returned to your own world, you may safely exit the elevator. Getting back to our own world may be more difficult than it seems. You may become disoriented and forget which elevator in which you arrived. The elevator may seem to get further and further away from you as you walk towards it, and so on. Be vigilant and keep your wits about you. If at any point during the ritual you faint, pass out, or otherwise lose consciousness, you will likely wake up in your own home. However, be sure to carefully examine your surroundings upon waking up. The home to which you have returned may not be the one you left when you first set out to attempt this ritual. You must not, in any case, attempt this too many times. This makes you susceptible to accidental slipping through the worlds. If you do not get out of the elevator on the 10th floor, or if the woman does not get in, you should head straight back down to the first floor. If you faint in the other world and find yourself back in your world, be careful. You've connected yourself with the other world and can now be pulled there and back at any given moment. This also happens to people with what they call susceptible souls. So this game seems pretty far-fetched, right? Like there's no way this could work. Well, I'll leave that to you to determine, but I did find some examples online of a few people who have attempted to play the game and lived to tell their tale. Several people who have tried this game said they didn't experience anything, but there are several posts on Reddit where people claim that not only did it work, they can't definitively say whether or not they're back in their own world. You can look some of these examples up yourself if you'd like to read through some of them. Whether they're true or not, they are entertaining to read. Some of them claim they saw the woman and had to abort mission. Some say they did the whole thing, saw the woman, but didn't interact with her, and now either have returned home or they're not sure if they're home or not. I even saw one that said while this guy didn't interact with the woman, when he got off on the 10th floor, he sneezed, and the woman gave a guttural growl and attempted to reach her arm out to grab him before the elevator doors closed on her and snapped her arm off like a twig. All of the descriptions of that other world are pretty much exactly as the instructions describe. No electricity, no one else there, red cross visible off in the distance. So make of this game what you will, but I don't think I'll be playing it anytime soon. So now I want to move over to the second topic of this week's episode, which is the Death of Elisa Lam. And before I start, I just want to give a huge shout out to the Trace Evidence podcast. I listened to their episode on Elisa Lam to get a lot of my information, and it's incredibly well done. They provided much more detail about the case and the investigation than I'm going to give you here, so if you are curious to know more after finishing this episode, definitely go check them out. This is a case that has been talked about over and over because of the strange circumstances that surrounded Elisa's death. If you've never heard of this case, let me tell you, it's quite the doozy. If you have heard of this case though, sorry, you're gonna have to sit through the details of it again. So Elisa Lam was a 21-year-old Chinese-Canadian woman. She was born on April 31st, 1991 to her parents David and Yina Lam, who emigrated to Canada before Elisa was born. Elisa also had a younger sister named Sarah, and they were very close siblings. Elisa's family lived in Burnaby, Canada, where her parents ran a restaurant called Palms, which specialized in home-style Canadian and Chinese cuisine. She had a really tight circle of friends, and she was very close with her family. She was described as being a brilliant young woman, but she did have some dark moments. Elisa suffered from bipolar disorder and depression, and did have moments when she was too overwhelmed to deal with her stress and would just shut down. While attending the University of British Columbia in early 2013, Elisa's difficulties dealing with the stress became too much for her, and she began struggling in school. She eventually made the decision to withdraw from her classes and would begin a plan to start traveling. Soon, she would leave on what she would call her West Coast tour, a trip she would take to California by herself in order to travel and see more of the world. Her plan with the trip was to start in San Diego, then travel south hitting different spots before ending her trip in Santa Cruz. According to Google Maps, that's about a 472-mile trip down the length of the state. While on this trip, Elisa frequently spoke with her friends and family. She would call her parents multiple times a day to talk to them about what she was doing, places she had seen, and what she planned to do next. She would also consistently post on social media to keep her friends updated, and routinely updated her Tumblr blog while on the trip as well. Having not planned to stop in Los Angeles on her trip when she had set out, Elisa books a 3-day stay at the Cecil Hotel on January 26, 2013. Her booking was scheduled for check-in on the 28th and check-out on the 31st. Now, it should be noted that Elisa was already in LA on the 26th when she booked her stay at the Cecil Hotel. Why she chose to change her accommodations are unknown, and honestly, I couldn't really find where she had been staying prior. I mean, really, where she had been staying prior is kind of besides the point. It really doesn't matter. But the fact that she changed where she was staying and chose the Cecil Hotel out of everywhere to stay is what is interesting about this decision. Okay, so now I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, but this is why that choice to stay at the Cecil was such a captivating part of the story. The Cecil Hotel in downtown LA sits right next to Skid Row, which is not exactly the best part of town. It's an historic hotel, having opened its doors for business in 1924. It's well known as a cheap place to stay, and has been home to several famous incidents over the years. I'm not going to bore you with the details of when the hotel was remodeled or what years were good for business and which weren't, although for those of you who know me personally, I think that is fascinating, but I have a bachelor's degree in history and volunteer regularly at our local history museum, so I find stuff like that to be incredibly interesting. Anyway, what I do want to tell you about is the darker side of the hotel's history. The Cecil was home to several suicides, violent deaths, and strange occurrences throughout the years. And because of this, it's said that the hotel is one of the most haunted places in Los Angeles. The hotel garnered such a negative reputation for things like this that they actually decided to change the name of the hotel to the Stay on Main in 2011, in an attempt to distance the hotel from the seedy image of its past. It obviously didn't work though, and people still refer to the hotel as the Cecil. So that you can fully understand just how much untimely death the Cecil Hotel has seen, I'm going to list these events for you now. I apologize in advance, this list is somewhat long, but it'll give you a full picture of what I'm trying to get across here. The first reported suicide was in 1931, only 4 years after the hotel opened. A man by the name of W.K. Norton killed himself in his room after ingesting poison capsules. In 1932, Benjamin Dodick would die of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. 2 years later, in 1934, Army Medical Corps Sergeant Louis D. Borden was found dead in his room after having slashed his own throat with a razor. In 1937, Grace E. Magro died in the hospital after having fallen from the 9th story of the hotel and into some telephone wires. It's unclear whether the death was an accident or the result of a suicide. The following year, in 1938, U.S. Marine Corps fireman Roy Thompson jumped from the top floor of the hotel and landed on the roof of a neighboring building. He did not survive the jump. In 1939, Navy officer Irwin C. Neblett was found dead in his room in the same manner as Mr. Norton, having also ingested poison. In 1940, Dorothy Skyger would also ingest poison while staying at the hotel. It's not clear whether Dorothy actually died from this. It was only reported by the Los Angeles Times that she was found, quote, near death. The hotel went nearly 4 years without another suicide or death attempt, when in 1944, 19-year-old Dorothy Jean Purcell was sharing a room with her boyfriend, 38-year-old Ben Levine. Unaware that she was pregnant, Dorothy woke to intense stomach cramps, which she did not know were labor pains. She claimed that she didn't want to disrupt Ben's sleeping, so she left the room and went to the hotel bathroom on the same floor, where she eventually gave birth to a baby boy. However, Dorothy thought the baby she had just delivered was stillborn, so she did the only logical thing and threw the baby out the window. I couldn't find what floor Dorothy and Ben were staying on, but the baby landed on the roof of a neighboring building, so it was pretty high up. Also, coroners determined that the baby had actually been born alive and well, finding that his lungs had filled with air. In January of 1947, Elizabeth Smart, also known as the Black Dahlia, is said to have had her last drink at the bar in the Cecil Hotel. Later that same year, Robert Smith jumped to his death from a 7th floor window. In 1954, Helen Gurney would also commit suicide by jumping from a 7th floor window, landing on top of the Cecil's marquee. In 1962, Julia Frances Moore jumped from the window of her room on the 8th floor. And later that year, Pauline Otten would do the same, jumping from the 9th floor. However, Pauline landed on top of a pedestrian by the name of George Giannini, killing them both instantly. In 1964, a hotel worker would discover a woman called Pigeon Goldie Osgood dead in her room. I'm not sure what her real name was, I could only find the nickname Pigeon Goldie. She had been raped, stabbed, and beaten in her room, and her room had been ransacked. Her murder remains unsolved. In 1975, an unidentified woman who registered a room at the Cecil under the name Allison Lowell jumped to her death from her 12th floor room, landing on the 2nd floor roof of the hotel. In 1985, the Cecil was a short-term residence for notorious serial killer Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker. And then in 1991, serial killer Jack Unterweger would also take up residence in the Cecil, seemingly as some sort of twisted homage to Ramirez, who he idolized. Unterweger's residence at the hotel marks the last of the disturbing events to take place there for quite some time, until the news broke out of Elisa Lam in 2013. The fact that the Cecil Hotel has such a dark history and is rumored to be haunted had no apparent influence on Elisa's decision to reserve a room there, but I mentioned the hotel's past and described those events in such detail because it's theorized that Elisa's death would not have taken place had she not gone to the Cecil, or that her death was inevitable and whatever dark force has its hold over the hotel drew Elisa in. That is definitely a hard theory to accept if you don't believe in the paranormal, but we're here to discuss the theories around the case, and that is one of the theories I was able to find. So Elisa checked into the Cecil on January 28th, 2013. She had booked a shared room, and when she checked in, would have 2 roommates. However, these roommates complained that she was behaving oddly and requested that she be moved to a different room. There doesn't seem to be any further explanation of what that behavior looked like. I couldn't find an interview with either of the roommates or even what their names were. The only description we have of her behavior is odd. But because of the complaints, she was moved to her own private room. It's not clear what Elisa did during her time in LA. I'm sure her parents have some of that information, and I'm sure they've shared that with the police, but I couldn't seem to find anything about what she actually did while in the city. I can reasonably assume, though, that her parents did have some of that information about her time in LA, because Elisa's regular contact with her friends and family was the sole reason her disappearance was noticed so quickly. On January 31st, Elisa was scheduled to check out of her room at the Cecil Hotel. Her trip was supposed to be dwindling down, and she was supposed to be on to her next destination on her path to Santa Cruz. But she would never make it to Santa Cruz. Elisa did not check out of her hotel room that morning, and for the first time, her family and friends had not heard from her at all that day. Naturally, her parents became worried about her well-being, so they got in contact with the Vancouver police, who contacted the LAPD in order to file a missing persons report for Elisa. Unfortunately, police didn't take the missing persons report too seriously. They thought, well, she's here as a tourist on vacation. She probably went out to see the city, lost track of time, and forgot to call home. Elisa's parents weren't having it, though. They flew down to LA from their home in Canada to try and push the investigation along and find their daughter. So police swept the hotel, searching everywhere they were legally allowed to search. They couldn't search every single room, though, because the people staying at the hotel had a right to their own privacy. They could ask the residents if they could search their rooms, but if they said no, they didn't have any probable cause to make them step aside and go through their things. They would have had to give explicit permission for them to do so, which sort of makes you wonder if there's something they could have missed due to one of the residents hiding something. They did, however, interview all of the staff at the hotel, used dogs to try and track her scent, and even explored the roof of the building. They wouldn't find anything they could use during their search. One thing they did recover during their investigation was surveillance footage from an elevator in the Cecil, which is the last known footage of Elisa alive. Do you see where this is going? If you've heard of this case already and you've already seen the footage, then you know it's very strange. But if you haven't seen the video of Elisa on the elevator, I would encourage you to check it out. It's not very long and it's really easy to find on YouTube. Either way, I'm going to go ahead and describe Elisa's actions to you during this video. At the beginning of the selected footage, we see Elisa enter the elevator, turn to the panel of buttons, and press several of them. She backs up sort of into the rear corner of the elevator and stands there for a few seconds, then steps forward and rapidly sticks her head out the door, looking to her right and back in again. She then backs into the elevator again, this time standing with her back against the wall to the right hand of the elevator. Then we can see her scoot over into the corner directly beside the panel of buttons, as if she's hiding from someone. Where she's standing, you wouldn't be able to see her if you were passing by the elevator from the outside. She hides there for a few seconds, then peeks around the right side of the door again, but slowly this time. She looks out for a few seconds before doing a little jump out into the hallway. She looks to her left, steps backwards into the elevator rather quickly, then steps back out of the elevator and to the left. She is completely outside of the elevator at this point and almost completely out of the view of the camera. You can really only see her right arm. But even though you can't really see her, her positioning makes it look as if she might be looking to her right down the hallway. And to me it looks as if maybe she's talking and gesturing to someone. There's no sound on the surveillance footage, so we don't know if she was speaking or not. After a bit, she re-enters the elevator with her hands held slightly above her head, then starts pressing the buttons again. But like all of them, I really think she pressed every single button. Then, once again, she steps back out of the elevator, back into that same spot where she could barely be seen on the camera. At this point, she starts waving her hands around while facing to the right. There's a lot of debate about what she's doing here, and I really couldn't tell you what I think this was. Maybe she was talking to someone again? I don't know, but the gestures she uses are pretty strange. Then, she just leaves. She walks away to the left down the hall, away from the person she was speaking to if she was in fact speaking to someone. Now, it should be noted that while the entire video is going, about 2.5 minutes, the doors to the elevator never close. They do finally close when Alisa walks away at the end of the video, but the entire time she's on camera, the doors to the elevator stay open. I'll talk about that more in a bit. Another detail worth mentioning is that, like most surveillance cameras, there is a timestamp at the bottom left of the video, but for some reason that timestamp appears to have been blurred, and there doesn't seem to be any explanation for that. And again, I'll talk about that later. Police didn't really know what to do with this footage because it really didn't tell them anything other than she was alive at the time the footage was captured, but they still didn't know where she was. On February 19, 2013, residents at the hotel began complaining to management that the water coming from their sinks was discolored and tasted horrible. Because of this, a maintenance man on staff went up to the roof of the building to check out the water tanks that supplied the building. To his horror, when he opened one of those tanks, Elisa Lam's body was found, nude, floating in the water and starting to decompose. As you can imagine, that probably would make the water taste quite foul, and I would probably have to induce vomiting if I knew that's what I had tasted. Like, seriously, can you imagine being the one to have taken a sip from a glass of water and complained about the taste, only to find out that a dead body had been decomposing in the water you just ingested? That's nauseating just thinking about it. So, they've found Elisa's body, but they have no idea what happened to her. Officially, her death has been ruled an accident with bipolar disorder as a contributing factor. Case solved, right? Well, some people say that this couldn't have possibly been an accident, so let's go into some of the theories of this case. Some claim that for this to have been an accident, Alisa would have had to have been some sort of magician. First of all, the roof access to the Cecil Hotel was reportedly almost always locked with an alarm set on the door. This alarm was set even when the door was not locked, so anyone who went through the door would have had to disable the alarm. Second, there was also reportedly no ladder access to the tanks, which themselves would have been secured. And third, even if Alisa were able to get through the door and into a tank, it would have been nearly impossible for her to close the lid to the tank over herself unless she had done so while jumping in. It was an incredibly heavy lid, and she would have not been able to reach it from inside the tank. Some have questioned whether or not Alisa would have even had to use the roof access door to get onto the roof, speculating that surely she would have been capable of gaining access to the roof using the fire escape. And well, technically, yes, that is true, but supposedly if someone were to attempt to get onto the roof by way of the fire escape, it would have tripped the same alarm the roof access door would have set off. This line of thought may not be entirely accurate, though. After the conclusion of the police investigation, there was an independent investigation done in which the investigator attempted to recreate Alisa's suspected journey to the water tanks in order to see if it could actually be done, and he wasn't exactly unsuccessful. The investigator did attempt to use the fire escape to access the roof, and he was able to do so without setting off any alarms. Once on the roof, he noticed that there was a raised section of the roof directly next to the water tanks that, when standing on top of it, would have overlooked them. And it would have been easy to get on top of that raised portion of the roof because there were steps leading up to the top and a ladder that you could climb up to it. When the investigator got to the top of the platform and looked down on the tanks, he could see that some of the tank lids were sitting wide open. Not only were they not secured, they weren't even shut. And even if there wasn't convenient access to the platform, and getting up there had proved an impossibility, the investigator noted that there were, in fact, ladders chained to the tanks themselves. So really, Alisa could have easily gotten down into one of those tanks, or she could have even fallen into one on accident. But even if you can accept that, there are still so many questions left unanswered. One question that still remained was, why was Alisa discovered naked in the tank? Well, that's a question the police had as well. They even used a rape kit on her and clipped some of her fingernails for analysis to see if they could find any evidence of a sexual abuse. But it doesn't appear that those tests were ever actually performed. It's not clear why that may be, but there were no results for those tests disclosed in the police report. The autopsy report did have some questionable findings, though. When Alisa was found, her rectum had prolapsed and blood was found pooled in the anal area. Unfortunately, this wasn't investigated much. It's possible that these things could have happened naturally as a result of the decomposition process, but there's no way to know for sure since there are no results to be found from the rape kit and nail samples. So that is one question that is still left unanswered. This next theory has already been debunked, but it's such an astounding coincidence that I couldn't not mention it. Around the time that Alisa had stayed at the Cecil Hotel, there was a pretty large tuberculosis outbreak amongst the homeless population of Skid Row, which, as I mentioned earlier, is pretty close to the Cecil. Some people think that maybe Alisa's behavior was caused by a tuberculosis infection. This theory could make sense, but only if she were being treated for tuberculosis, which we know she wasn't. The behavior she was exhibiting is a possible side effect of the drug used to treat tuberculosis, but you wouldn't be experiencing those symptoms if you were not being treated. Simply having the illness would not cause such behavior. However, along the lines of this tuberculosis theory, some people believe Elisa Lam never even existed, and the whole story was fabricated to distract from the tuberculosis outbreak. But why would that be necessary? Honestly, I'm not sure. The outbreak was prominent amongst the homeless population, who obviously most likely did not have access to any kind of health care, so no one would really be turning their heads and wondering what was going on over there. I can't see anyone really questioning homeless people in close quarters developing a contagious illness. So that theory doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but there is one strange fact that I can't explain, and really, I feel like this is the type of coincidence, if it is just a coincidence, that had a 1 in a billion chances of occurring. And that fact is that the test used to detect for tuberculosis is called the Lam Alisa. Like, seriously, Google it. It's spelled exactly the same, too. That's just a little too weird, right? The conspiracy theory seems pretty unlikely, though. But there were some other more logical theories as well, and a majority of those theories resulted from the odd behavior Alisa exhibited in the elevator surveillance video. So we know Alisa suffered from bipolar disorder and depression, and that police concluded her mental illness was a contributing factor in her death. But what role did her mental illness play? Some people theorize that she had a psychotic break, which would explain the odd behavior, and that's a possibility that really can't be ruled out. We just don't know if that's the case or not, but it surely seems reasonable. Other people have wondered if her actions weren't due to a psychotic break, but either a reaction to or a lack of medication. Alisa was on a number of prescribed drugs to treat her mental illness, so maybe she wasn't taking them while on the trip. Well, the parents say that's not the case. They spoke with Alisa every day she was on that trip, and they never thought she seemed unwell. The police happened to agree with this too. They did produce a toxicology report that showed Alisa had been taking most of the medications prescribed to her within a reasonable time before her death. She was supposed to be taking 4 different medications: dextroamphetamine for ADHD, which was not in her system, Lamictal to treat bipolar disorder, Seroquel for bipolar disorder and depression, also not found in her system, and Wellbutrin, another antidepressant. So could she have been unbalanced because she wasn't taking the proper medication? Or maybe she had been prescribed medications that weren't appropriate for her, and they caused her to behave the way she did. That's another prominent theory. Wellbutrin is known to have a side effect of mania in those who were suffering from bipolar disorder. So is that the answer? Again, we just don't know, but it can't be ruled out. The mental illness angle is the most prominent theory, and honestly, it just makes the most sense. It's logical and it's plausible, but some people just aren't so sure. There's also the murder theory. While police say there was no physical evidence of a struggle or any type of assault on Alisa, some people still think there's someone else involved here. And that brings us back to, why did she decide to stay at the Cecil 2 days after arriving in LA, a city which she hadn't initially planned to visit? Well, many think it's possible that she was meeting someone. Furthermore, other people think it's possible that she was meeting someone who worked at the Cecil, which could answer a lot of questions. Here's why that theory could make sense. The Cecil was an odd hotel choice, and she didn't stay there until 2 days after arriving in the city, which means that she already had other accommodations. Maybe staying at the Cecil would have been a more convenient choice than wherever she had been staying before, because whoever she was meeting might have been an employee there, and she wouldn't have even had to leave the building to see them. That would also explain how Alisa got onto the roof of the building without an alarm going off, and how she could have ended up in the water tank. a perfect, albeit temporary, hiding place for a body that even the police didn't think to check out. Also, as I mentioned before, when you watch the surveillance video, it looks as if Alisa might be talking to someone, and at the same time hiding from someone. But that person never appears on camera, if there was in fact someone else there. So either that person didn't exist, or maybe that person was aware of a surveillance camera in the elevator and didn't want to be seen. Again, there's no evidence that Alisa was murdered or that she had planned to meet someone in LA. But then again, maybe meeting someone wasn't actually planned. Maybe she decided to make a stop in LA, met someone who worked for the hotel, and that's why she decided to go to the Cecil. Either way, the police say she didn't show signs of any physical violence. Some people suggest that maybe she was drugged, which would help explain the behavior and the lack of trauma. But that toxicology report didn't show any traces of any narcotics in her system, so we can probably rule that one out. Although I did see somewhere that people thought maybe she was alive in the tank long enough for any drugs to work themselves through her system, but I find that pretty unlikely, especially since they did find traces of prescription drugs in her system, which I would think would also have worked their way out of her system along with any narcotics. But I'm not an expert, I could be wrong about that. Another suggestion that there could have been foul play involved is the fact that her Tumblr was updated after her death, and, as I understand, we don't really know what became of her phone. Could someone have killed her, took her phone, and made a post to her Tumblr account as some kind of sick taunt? I guess it's possible, although it's also possible that Alisa used the Q feature on Tumblr and that the post had been scheduled ahead of time. So to explain the behavior in the video, we have been given the ideas of drugs, lack of drugs, a psychotic episode, or a seemingly odd interaction with another person off camera. There are some other theories about that footage that say maybe she was just frustrated that the elevator wasn't functioning properly, as the doors wouldn't close. Or maybe she was just playing around with someone and the video really didn't have anything to do with her death. It was just an unfortunate coincidence. There are body language experts who have evaluated Alisa's behavior, but they seem to differ in opinion as well. Some say she showed signs of anxiety, but more predominantly she showed signs of playfulness and even possibly sexuality. Along those lines, some say they didn't actually see any indication of fear in her body language, but may have nervously been trying to get the attention of someone she found attractive. Now, if that's the case, to me it seems like that could go hand in hand with the murder theory, but I couldn't find any other theories relating to that. There is one other oddity about the footage that really doesn't have anything to do with Alisa. There seems to be some debate about whether or not the footage has been edited. As I mentioned, the timestamp at the bottom of the video was blurred, and there doesn't seem to be any logical explanation as to why that would be. But also, it appears that some footage might actually be missing. Some people argue that there is about 50 seconds missing from the footage in various spots, and that seems to be a fairly popular belief. But why would there be footage missing? Is there some kind of cover-up going on here? Maybe this person on the hotel staff that she could have been meeting edited themselves out of the footage. Or, a more likely explanation is that maybe this was done to protect the privacy of other individuals staying at the hotel. But internet sleuths seem to think that's too convenient. But back to Alisa's behavior. We can try every logical explanation to explain away the odd behavior Alisa was exhibiting on that footage. But what if there is no logical explanation to it? Some people seem to think that Alisa was possessed by the spirit of one of the many people who lost their lives at the hotel. Maybe none of these actions were Alisa's own doing, and she was being controlled by a supernatural force. Or perhaps she was trying to escape from something else. I found a theory on Reddit that said maybe she could sense the presence of some sort of invisible force with her in the elevator, and that's why the doors wouldn't close. I think it's more likely that the doors wouldn't close because she kept pressing buttons and getting in and out of the elevator, so she was tripping the sensors. But there is more to that theory. This Reddit user also theorized that maybe this invisible entity is why Alisa got into the water tank. If there was, in fact, an invisible entity following her, maybe she thought that if she got into the water tank, she could see ripples in the water from the motion of this entity. The hotel is well known for supposedly being haunted, so could these theories be outside the realm of possibility? But there's one more theory about Alisa's death that I want to discuss, the one I find the most interesting and the whole inspiration around this episode. Is it possible that Alisa was actually playing the elevator game? If you watch the video, it appears that Alisa is studying the panel of buttons and begins pressing a few of them. If you recall from my earlier explanation of the game, you only need to press those buttons when you were trying to return to our world. So is this footage of Alisa attempting to return to our realm? Well, that doesn't seem to follow the order of the game, but we also see Alisa hiding from someone. Who is she hiding from? Could there possibly be a woman heading her way? When she steps out of that elevator, she appears to be talking to someone. Now, the rules of the game explicitly state not to interact with the woman. So, here's what people theorize happened to Alisa. She was playing the game and followed the correct instructions, but then got to the 5th floor and stepped out of the elevator. The video begins with her stepping onto the elevator, so maybe she thought she was at the point where she could step off and mistakenly did so. Then she gets back on the elevator and presses the return buttons, but realizes she's still on the 5th floor, where the woman would enter. When she peeks her head out of the door, she sees the woman heading her way. She freaks out and starts to hide. Then, not knowing what to do, gets out of the elevator again and pretends not to be playing, trying to nonchalantly interact with the lady in the hopes that she will just get on the elevator and leave her alone. Thinking she had messed up the game, maybe it wouldn't matter if she interacted with the woman. But this doesn't work, so she gets back on the elevator, freaking out, and presses more buttons trying to get out of there. Then, when the elevator doesn't move, she leaves to take the stairs. So maybe this woman decided to take Alisa for her own, as described in the game instructions. As vague as that sounds, maybe Alisa was killed by this creature masquerading as a woman. Maybe her death can't be explained by the logical, but she involved herself in a game that she just couldn't win. And that is all I have for you this week. What do you think happened to Elisa Lam? If you have any theories you'd like to share with me, please send them to me in an email. My email address is sywmtbpod@gmail.com. Also, if you have any suggestions for an episode topic, email those to me as well. Please remember to check out my Patreon page if you want to help support the show. Again, the link to that website is www.patreon.com/sywmtbpod. The link for that is also in the show notes. Also, please find me on social media. I'm really enjoying engaging with people who listen to the show. You can like me on Facebook. The page is titled So You Want Me to Believe Podcast. And you can find me on both Instagram and Twitter. The handle is the same on both platforms, at SYWMTBpod. If you like the show, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Good reviews help others find the show and make me feel all good inside. And if you didn't like the show, thanks for listening, you're wrong, and goodbye. But seriously, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. I truly hope you enjoyed it. But that's all for now, and I will see you all again next